men went from the very cold and stoic, masculine John Wayne style of masculinity to indecisive, not protective, not, I'll let her do it, very sensitive, very empathetic, very, very feminine. For men, it takes them about 250 swipes to get one coffee date. But four out of the 5 coffee dates will actually ghost him. The 1,000 swipes it takes him to get one actual coffee date who's going to show up. I don't think dating apps have done us any favors. There were times throughout history where different cultures had women that men would go to learn about sex. But when a woman becomes a mother, she actually becomes far more masculine in her energy. The polarity suddenly diminishes. So the polarity of the relationship's gone. There's no desire. And then we're tired. It's like, yeah, sure, you're tired, but it doesn't mean that there can't be desire.
Nic Warner, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're very excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
So we think that it's a really right time to have a conversation about sexuality and the current landscape of sexuality. And we could think of no one better to talk to than you about this. We love the way that you speak your truth from an informed place and an authentic place. We'd love to start asking you about the rise of dating apps and how has that changed the landscape, in your opinion, of relationships and also sex?
Yeah, it's definitely made things very interesting for those who are not blessed with a certain look. There's a stat that comes out that's something like 75% of women are attracted to 12% of men on dating apps, which leaves 88% of men going for 25% of the women. And the result of this is anybody that's less than above attractiveness for men, it takes them about 250 swipes to get one coffee date. But 4 out of the 5 coffee dates will actually ghost him. So it takes 1,000 swipes for him to. So Murray was 1 in 200. The 1,000 swipes it takes him to get one actual coffee date who's going to show up. So this results in a really detrimental environment and situation for everybody because men become more lonely, more disconnected. They step back from dating. They don't have the skills. They haven't practiced the skills to go out and to be able to have a decent conversation. And just the way that society is really pushing for this almost, without using these terms, but almost like a non-binary kind of depolarized existence. I read a lot of comments and hear a lot from men who just don't get it. Like, why should I have to pay? What about equality? Like, why would I open the door for her? Why can't we just open the door for each other? And all of these opinions and preferences that it's like, yeah, sure, great, but you're not going to succeed for very long in a relationship if it's all about, well, we're equal and there's no polarity at all, because that's the way that society's going.
It's like it. Go on, sorry.
I don't think dating apps have done us any favors. Yet there's a graph I saw the other day where it's something, I don't know what the exact number is, 70 or 80% of couples now meet online. So it is, whether I like it or not, it's still like a way of the future.
He's a great filmmaker in the UK. I can't remember his name, but he did a film about, 15, 20 years ago called The Century of the Self, all about the 20th century and this kind of rise of this kind of like selfish culture, essentially. And like that, all of the kind of industrialized, militarized, technocratic, all the things that we've sort of come into being, we've bred in the last 100 years, have all kind of originated in this notion of like this kind of what about me kind of culture. Like, And it's kind of the thing that you're speaking about, that lack of chivalry, or how chivalry essentially is essentially a lack of selfishness, which is offered by the, I suppose, the protective male in order to, stand on the roadside of the pavement, open the door, essentially like assuring that places are safe for women, like in a tiny gestural way, but that gets eroded by the sense of like, but where's mine? What about me? Thing, right? Like, do you think that root is something that was always there in human culture, it was just waiting to be expressed? Or is there something like that's happened somehow in the last 100 years that's just led, like where does it come from?
I could write a book on this stuff, actually. So yeah, 2 million years-ish, we've been hunters and collectors. Hunters and gatherers. I was thinking of listening to some music earlier. Hunters and gatherers, and about 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were around. So we'll start from there. For 200,000 years, men were the providers, the protectors, and the procreators. Like that was our role. And then the women would be there. They would nurture the tribe, and they would cook and clean and keep everything kind of emotionally in tune. And they'd make the clothes and some of the weapons. But we were very clear on what our roles were. Up until just after the Second World War, it was very much like this the entire time for all of humanity. And then second wave feminism comes in, and then after the Second World War, women kind of were pushed into the workplace. And then because of the amount of trauma that the entire world was kind of dwelling in after the Second World War, there was this real need and desire for men to be softer and to be more sensitive and more empathetic, and very true and very necessary and very beautiful. But there was no role model. There was no roadmap of this is what it needs to look like. So enter the 60s and 70s in this whole free love movement. Men went from the very cold and stoic, masculine John Wayne style of masculinity to indecisive, not protective, not, I'll let her do it, very sensitive, very empathetic, very, very feminine. And at the same time, there's been this push for women to get into the workplace and to do it all, because boss babes and, women power and all of these things that have pushed women too far to one side and pushed men too far to the other side. And then suddenly we find ourselves in these relationships where the intimacy is dead, there is no polarity, and there's just a whole lot of resentment. So 50% of marriages end in divorce, another 25% stay together because kids, money, whatever. It has not done us any favors to try and dissolve these deep biological structures that are innate in all of us. I can say much more on all of that also.
I think, and I was thinking about what you were saying about the World War and how that created that dynamic that sort of was really aggressively sort of traumatic, and then created this need for men to step back and be softer. But within that dynamic, so many men died and were away at war. But women were forced into having to be independent, stand up for themselves, look after themselves, rely on themselves, start being resilient and resourceful, and all of these things that force you to, as a woman, be sort of boundaried and stronger and armored and all of those things, which is the opposite of soft and receptive and all of that. And having come from, as a woman, having come from a situation where for many years there was no choice. There was no choice to work. There was no choice to be independent. There was no choice to have a passport. There was no choice to not have sex with your husband. Millions of different things. And like we were talking about earlier, choice is what everyone wants. That's what freedom is. But choice is only choice if the making of the choice that you're doing doesn't mean that you're an outcast or an outlier. And so women have come from that situation where they had no choice. Then they were given choice. And so then they're like, I have to take that choice. And then, like you said, men had no role model, but women had no role model either. and also sort of no optionality.
Well, the women's role model was the male behavior.
Right.
That's the thing.
Right. There's no female, like neither the men's role model was almost the women.
Exactly.
And then the women's role model was the men, but there was no. So this leads on to what for you, because there's a lot of terms that are bandied around on Instagram and places now about sacred sexuality and sacred masculinity and then toxic masculinity and all these things. Where did those terms come from, and how do you sit into an understanding of those terms? What do they mean? Like, what does masculinity, femininity, and then that sort of sacred honoring of those things mean? And why is that useful for people to understand?
So for me, masculinity is the transmission of embodied consciousness, and the feminine is the transmission of embodied love. And if we start there, consciousness is that which wraps around everything everything that exists within it. If you look at a riverbed, the riverbed holds the structure, the form, the shape, the direction. Consider that consciousness or the masculine. And then the water inside of it can be calm and steady, or it can be rapid and chaotic, but it's contained within a structure. It knows exactly where to go, how deep. And consider this the feminine energy, whether she is very calm and very gentle or very fiery or very whatever she is on the day that she needs to be that, fantastic, but she's contained. Problem comes when there is no structure, when there is no riverbed, and then the water tries to create its own riverbed, and it tries to create its own structure, and then it ends up drying out. So it's important for me for people to understand these definitions, because a lot of people mix up masculine, feminine with male, female, and they assign, well, that's misogynistic to think that women can't lead. It's like, that's not what people are saying. The masculine is a penetrative energy. The feminine is a receptive energy. So it's not that women can't lead. And in fact, when done properly, the feminine is that which leads. She leads with her energy. So a man that is in tune will feel into his partner. He'll observe his partner. Okay, what serves love the most in this moment is if I do this based on how his partner's feeling. And maybe it's something that goes against what she says that she wants, but he knows that it's going to serve love. Or maybe it goes against what he wanted. But because he's observing her and he's tuned in and he's wide enough and has a vast enough awareness, he can tell that her oracle is actually really on point, and he'll change his mind based on what she's feeling and what she's saying. So it works. They work together. They work in union. And it's this, ultimately, there's this divine union that kind of we're seeking and we're yearning for. Toxic masculinity is just another way of saying the shadow masculine. And it was a term that was coined in the 80s, which is really detrimental and has not done anybody any favors, because a lot of women use it to weaponize against men. And there's a lot of online man bashing it doesn't help anyone. Men kill themselves 4 times more than women do. Like, men are suffering. Yes, women suffer, and yes, women have suffered at the hands of men. So do men. So to call something toxic, especially if a boy, like a young boy, sees that or hears that, well, if masculinity is toxic, I don't want to be that. And then so he spends his life trying to kind of emancipate himself from anything that's masculine. So then he grows up and he's exactly the opposite of what a woman needs. She doesn't need a man that is soft and obedient and will do whatever she wants, whatever she needs. She needs somebody that's strong enough to hold her and to contain her. So she feels safe enough to be able to fully let go and surrender. And this is when, so you have divine masculine, healthy masculine, divine feminine, healthy feminine. Very much the same thing for me. And then you have passive and dominant shadows of both. And it is about, as much as possible, trying to live your life within that spectrum of healthy rather than swaying too far to one side.
Hmm. Right.
Well, so many questions. Can you give an example, just to make it really literal for people, of where those things, when you have, say, and you're saying a man maybe isn't able to hold space or understand the needs of that woman in order to be able to shift things left or right, or make the container maybe not as she imagines it, but as he understands it should be in order to foster love and to help her flow. Can you give a literal example of where that sort of thing might occur?
Yeah, absolutely. If a man's nervous system has not been cultivated and everything triggers him, the moment energy is too wide, the moment the water is wider than his riverbank, he'll collapse. And if he collapses, then she feels that she needs to become the riverbank. So suddenly this feminine, flowing, sensual, beautiful, receptive woman now closes her heart because it's not safe, because she then has to step into her masculine. This happens all the time with men that either haven't done the work or are too rigid or are too, the opposite end of the toxic masculine is the nice guy. It's the guy that is so emotional and so vulnerable that he can't hold anything. So if she feels that he's not safe enough to bring her whatever to him, she'll close down. And when she closes down, she does herself a disservice. Like, her gift to the world is an open, radiant heart. And if she doesn't feel safe enough to open that because he can't hold her, then they're both going to perpetuate this wounding. So the opposite of that is, say there is a man that's done a lot of work and energetically he can hold a lot. And she comes home and she's upset and something happened at work and she just starts flying off the handle. And she says things that frustrated her that he was involved in. But because he's wide enough to hold it all, he doesn't take it personally. So he breathes more deeply. He looks her in the eye, he smiles, and he says, "My love, I want to have this conversation, but breathe with me first." And she's, agitated and fired up, and he smiles and he says, "I want to have this conversation, but if we can't breathe together, we're going to go away and take 10 minutes apart, and we're going to come back when we're calm." And it's just this grounded presence that will really anchor her to earth so she won't fly away. And that's one way to look at it.
Sorry to do that.
So many questions. So the first thing that I was going to say is, like, those descriptions you're giving are really beautiful and they make a lot of sense. They resonate on loads of levels, and I'm sure that loads of people listening are going to be like, yeah, I've experienced that personally. Yeah, this is how I know that is. The thing is that most of us grow up, I always say this, like, if you're learning the flute, you go to flute lessons and then you have a teacher, and then you might outgrow that teacher, you get another teacher, and you keep learning until you become an expert. And then somehow within the realm of relationships and sexuality, we're just expected to know it, just intuit it, pull it out of the air when we meet the magic perfect partner, and then it's perfect. So we don't have those role models or those guides. They're sort of emerging now in small ways. Was there ever a time where people did have those guides, where within our societal structure, men were taught by men how to embody those things and women were taught by women? And when did that get lost?
Sexuality, yes. There were times throughout history where different cultures had women that men would go to learn about sex. So they would come of age and they'd go off to a tantrika, and she would teach them how to be an incredible lover. As far as healthy masculinity or healthy femininity, every culture that has ever existed except for ours has had a rite of passage. So the boy will become 12 or 14. Basically, up to the age of 6 or 7, the mother is his rock. The mother is the main attachment figure. And he needs to learn that he is safe, and he is always safe, and he can do whatever he wants, and she'll always be there for him. At around the age of 7, the brain develops to the point where he starts to look to download the male software, for lack of another term. So he'll look for men. And if he doesn't have a healthy male role model, he'll look anywhere. If he doesn't have any men, he won't get the software. So he'll start to really miss out. Around the age of then 12 to 14 is then he needs mentors, he needs coaches, like the flute coach. He needs people around him, good men around him, that he can see and receive that transmission of, oh, wow, that guy is really honest. Oh, well, the way that guy, his courage and his bravery when that thing that happened was, well, that's something that he receives from just witnessing other men. Same as women. Women do have a slight difference in that they begin to menstruate at a certain point where it's like, oh, wow, okay, something's shifting in my body. We don't have that as boys and men. So there's no set moment where it's like, okay, so now you're a man. So we have, men running countries that are still psychologically stuck in boyhood.
Yeah, I remember I've listened to a guy called Michael Mead a lot who does this sort of work, I'm sure you know, and his like approach to it, the challenge that boys need to face, like they need to see an actual life risk, a sense of life risk at some point in that very early teenagehood, which they're just not afforded in today's kind of urbanized society. And maybe if they're an agricultural society, like even rural Ireland, there's a chance they'll be playing with big machinery, which is probably way outside their whatever, realm of, and they'll come up against those things, but kind of by incident or accident. It's not really designed. Are there places in the world where this is happening now? Are there, like, is that just gone? Like that idea? I know there are rites of passage in very traditional societies, but in terms of like more modern societies, are there places that are doing this better or worse?
There's a rite of passage institute in Australia that a man called Dr. Arnie Rubenstein who started up, and he has served, I think it's something like 250,000 people around the world now.
Cool.
He's even reintroduced rite of passage into some of the Aboriginal communities up north. So it is definitely something that, there are a lot of things that have come out in the last 10 years where people have started to realize that we messed up. The way that we're doing things is not right. And we need to go back to some of the old ways. Anywhere where there was or is an agrarian culture still, as you said, that where the boy goes off to work with his dad on the farm, and often he's there with brothers, cousins, uncles, like he sees men in action. But when the Industrial Revolution came in, dad went off to work, boy never saw dad working, so dad never taught him what hard work is like or hard work ethic. So he was just raised by mum. And then he went to school with female teachers, and up until 18, he's basically only ever seen women kind of in charge. And he learned to please women. If he pleased women, he'd get ahead. So then you have a whole bunch of men still trying to please women, even though they're grown men. So the rites of passage it's definitely making it come back. And admittedly, some of the more traditional things were quite brutal. There's a tribe in Brazil where you stick your hand into a glove of fire ants, and it's like 24 hours of intense pain, and you have to do it 20 times. So it's like, in Australia, they used to knock a tooth out in some of the Aboriginal tribes, and it normally involves a substantial enough ordeal. There's a tribe, I can't remember where, but once the boy is taken away, they're not allowed to see the mother again for 2 years. So the boy gets taken away at about the age of 12, 13. He goes off, he goes through his ordeal, he goes through his initiation. And then for 2 years, he's away from his mother. To stop that innate desire in both of them just to kind of go back to that comfort. And, Robert Bly, who was a colleague of Michael Mead, he wrote a book called Iron John, and he speaks about the necessity of mothers breaking away from their boys and how detrimental it is to them if they don't.
Yeah. And can you reverse engineer it? Let's say you're a guy like my age, 30s, 40s, and you haven't gone through that rite of passage. Like the idea, I presume, with kids at that age, whether they know it or not, there's a certain level of neurological development, hormonal things that are happening. So the timing is kind of probably pretty critical. Can you still do that in your 30s and 40s and go through that thing and re-engineer what is essentially a kind of a hardwired philosophy?
Yes, and that is why I do what I do. I was 33 and I realized I was still not a man, and I was really kind of, okay, now what? Like, I was married, I was an architect, I was successful externally, and I was deeply unhappy internally. I'm like, fuck, if I don't feel like a man now, what is going to be the thing that changes that? And I spent about 3.5 years traveling the world looking for those initiation experiences, like for the one thing that is going to put me over the edge. And I found it 3.5 years ago. So I was on the path for quite a while. But the format is very simple. It's like you get removed from community, you go through an ordeal, and then you're initiated or you're integrated back into society. So it doesn't have to be extreme. In fact, it can be very much not extreme. But it's once you enter that liminal space where your mind starts to become open to new possibilities. This is part of the process of, and breath work, in sex, you can enter liminal space. There's dancing. There are many ways that it can happen. And in that space, that is when you open yourself to change. So you can do it. I've taken guys through it in their 60s.
Amazing.
To come back to, you were talking before about that thing of the container and the masculine providing this safe container that allows the feminine, or the woman, to feel like she's safe to completely release, to be vulnerable and open, and how we've kind of lost that, and it's created this sort of break in dynamics in society and in relationships. And I was thinking, when you were talking about that, about the actual act of sex and sexuality as well, and how that plays out within the sexual dynamic, and how the consent movement and the Me Too movement has come up and had this very, very valid, very important conversation that needs to be had about understanding consent and how can we talk about that so that there isn't sort of unhealthy dynamics where there's domination in a way that's unhealthy. And also then I feel like perhaps it's not created a facility for, within a sexual dynamic, the man to hold that masculine space of steadiness and strongness and like, I'm in control, so that the woman can soften and release. And I wonder, how do you see that playing out in people who come to you? And do you think that that's having an effect on the massive rise of erectile dysfunction and, low libido and lack of sexuality around the world?
That's a great question. And again, something I could speak a lot on. Porn is the thing that you were talking about before. Like, we're expected to just kind of download these teachings of how to make love and how to be in a relationship. Porn is how most of the world learns about sex. And it's a really negative way to learn. It's very friction based. It is very one-sided. 76% of teenagers who watch porn think violence against women is okay. Like, it's a really horrible thing that we've created. And the reason it is so significant in society is because it doesn't matter about the size of your dick. It doesn't matter how long you last. It doesn't matter if she enjoys it. You don't have to be vulnerable. You don't have to know what you're doing. You don't have to provide aftercare. It's very easy. And there is so much shame and so much taboo around sex because nobody knows what the fuck they're doing. So porn is easier. Prior to 2006, under the age of 40, about 3% of men had erectile dysfunction. 2006 was when Pornhub and YouPorn and all of these free streaming porn sites came on. Since 2006, under the age of 40, 37% of men have erectile dysfunction. So is it because of porn? Well, that's we don't know, but porn definitely does not help. First of all, if you're with a partner, when you begin watching porn, the most vanilla porn is the thing that's going to get you off. But suddenly, like, your nervous system gets used to it and your brain gets used to it. And, what if I go a little bit darker? What if I go a little bit darker? And until eventually, if you've been watching it for long enough, it's like, well, okay, now I need something that is dark. So then you go back to your partner and she doesn't do the things that you get off on in porn. So then you can't get hard. Or she doesn't look like what you watch in porn. She doesn't enjoy it like they do in porn. Like, there are all of these reasons that make complete sense why too much porn is going to really harm a guy's erectile function. And then going back to what we spoke about in the beginning with this whole nice guy, toxic masculine shadow, the nice guy avoids conflict. He avoids anything that is going to make him appear or occur as toxic. So domination and assertiveness and confidence, scrap domination for a second. One of the problems with these nice guys is they threw out all of the toxic masculine traits, but they also threw out a lot of the healthy ones. So they got rid of the confidence and the assertiveness. And this underlying leadership of, like, I know what we're doing. I know what he's going to serve. I'm going to do it. Confidence could be considered part of that. But they got rid of all of it. So then they get into the bedroom and it's, I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to, no, is this okay? And it's very timid, very flaccid sex. I was at a summit earlier this year and I was having breakfast with Esther Perel. She's the only woman that I've ever let into a men's workshop.
Oh, wow.
And we were having a conversation after, because a lot of what I speak about is, creating safety. Every time you lie, every time you don't do something you said you were going to do, every time you do something that's a little bit kind of out of integrity, your partner's heart will close. And every time your partner's heart closes, she loses trust. She shuts down, she armors up. You're getting further and further away from that really divine union. So I often speak about safety and the things that we need to do to make women safe, because men don't get it. What we need to feel safe is vastly different. We can walk down the street at night with our headphones in, doesn't matter. Have the same conversation with a woman, completely different story. So we just don't understand the baseline of safety that women require. So I was having a conversation with her, and one of the practices that I do is I get the men to embody their wild man, to embody the part of them that was shut down when they were 2 or 3. Stop fighting, stop playing rough. Don't be so loud. Follow the rules. All of these things that we say to little boys that just really shut them down and cage the wildness inside of them. So I do this practice where we embody that and then go full expression of the wild man, but now tone it down and then turn up the heart. And then titrate between full wild man and then wild man with heart, and then can you find the balance? And she said to me, there is way too much emphasis on a woman's safety in sex. And I looked at her and I was like, what do you mean? And she said, it's fucking boring. Men are so overly concerned about how safe we are. They are timid and they are impotent, and it's just fucking boring. I was like, wow, okay, that's strong. I was like, well, that is also why I do this practice, because the vast majority of women want to feel his wild man when it's connected to his heart. But most of the time, it's not connected to the heart. Most of the time, it's actually very disconnected, so it becomes abusive, or it becomes violent, or it's aggressive, rather than when it is connected to the heart and there's this slight transmission of darkness, but yet she feels him feeling her. And this is the piece that we're missing massively in society. Women are missing also.
Yeah.
It's the consent thing, I guess, it leads into, doesn't it? Like, where we're having so many conversations about consent as, the primary number one thing we should all be seeking in all areas of life, and particularly when it comes to sex, obviously, because safety is primary. But where I guess we lose track then is there a role for domination that edges on the edge of consent in the place where nobody knows? Because sex, when it's really good, is like a free play, right? It's like it's like we don't know it's an exploration. It's like somewhere where you actually don't know the next steps until they happen. And that can't happen if everything has been consented, in a kind of a very hard frame kind of beforehand. Do you have in your work, do you do the sort of work that will like manage a man's, and how does a man, would you say, navigate that conversation? Let's say particularly if he's in the dating world and trying to embody this thing you're talking about, which is this healthy masculinity, without giving too much credence to the notion of toxicity, but just not auguring towards that thing at all. But then in a dating framework where they're required to behave in a way that what the world says is good behavior now, but still expressed as well. Like, it feels like those two things are so dissonant. Can they even be in one place?
I think it comes down to this piece of remaining tethered to your heart. And there's not much that you cannot do if you are feeling your heart, you're feeling her in the moment, and she's feeling this. Women feel 10,000 times more than men do. She's feeling you really grounded and tethered, and then you amplify darkness. She can feel if it's safe. As far as a boundary, something like, what are you a hard no to? Like, I'm not going to go through a list of things that I want to do to you, but what are you a hard no to? Well, I'm a hard no to this, this, and this. Okay, great. Anything else? No, that's it. Okay, so leave it to me. And there's really, how deep is your breath when this is happening? How present are you? How still are you? The reason there is so much emphasis on a woman's safety is because most men breathe way too shallow. They're too stuck in their head. They're too jittery. They're not connected to the heart. They're not connected to her heart. So they get, they occur as unsafe. Even if they're just sitting there, they occur as unsafe. But then you get somebody who's well practiced. You can feel how magnetic he is through the depth of his breath. And you can feel like the really good teachers. You walk into a room and you can feel them. And, most of the time they could do whatever they wanted and the person would feel absolutely safe, just because you can feel their heart. You can feel them feeling you. And then, the gurus or whatever, always fuck it up and go too far and use their powers. And welcome to Neo Tantra.
Yeah. It's really problematic, that, isn't it? And unfortunately, that knowing that it's such a historical guarantee that if men have, unfortunately, this kind of like freedom to lead and they've got the adulation, no matter how conscious they are entering that space, it always gets screwed up. Like, it always goes too far.
It's a sign of how malnourished women are. When, there was an experience that I had a few years ago where I gave boundaries about what I was available for with a woman. And we'd just come out of a 10-day silent retreat, and I was feeling fantastic. This was part of I was doing these quite consistently. I was very much on my mission. And I was intimate with this woman, but I had boundaries. There were certain things that I was not willing to do. And I didn't receive, there was nothing sexual that I received. I was just, I was very clear. I'm not into this. I don't have time for this. I was going to the airport. I received a message maybe a week or two later because this woman wanted to come see me. I said, I'm sorry, I gave you very clearly my boundaries of what I'm available for. And that's it. Are you not going to come see me? I have no interest in this going any further. And she said, you have no idea how many times I've been raped, and you basically did the same thing. Wow. And I was like, first of all, nothing sexual happened. We kissed and we lay in bed, but I didn't, I was so clear with my integrity of what happened. And I spoke to a Tantra friend about it, and she said, you have a responsibility. Most women have never been with a man who is present. So for her to sit in front of you, for her heart to just crack open, and for you to then take that away, is really irresponsible. And this was the moment that everything for me shifted, because this whole spiritual fuckboy community where they just go around saying the lingo, meditating, doing whatever needs to be done to get in the pants of somebody else, and then okay, ciao. And it's just trauma, perpetuating trauma. So yeah, and it's a sign of how malnourished women are.
It's such a difficult thing, and this is something that we talk about all the time. And I think one of the things I really enjoy about our podcast is that we have male female dynamic on it, because when we get to talk about topics, we get to talk about it from our different perspectives and our experiences of life, which I think is really important, especially within the world of sexuality. I mean, your experiences growing up with sexuality are vastly different from mine.
Couldn't be more so.
There isn't a woman that I know who hasn't either been raped or sexually abused multiple times. It's happened to me just so many times, from school through to, when I got married. It was consistent, continual and consistent. And so as a woman, you're experiencing that. That's your experience of being in the world. And that's being reinforced then by movies, by hearsay, by all the things that you hear, which is like, you're not safe, men have leaky boundaries, men cheat on women, they run out of interest for you, your body has to be this way, you have to be able to boast of sex all the time, blah, 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 blah. Once you're over 40, you're unattractive. Once you've had a kid, you're unattractive. And so it's such a hard thing to navigate, because you're being programmed, and then you're experiencing the physical violation of those things. And then you have, with no guidance, to step into these arenas that are sexual, that are interacting with other people in their own varied histories, and be like, here is my soft feminine. So, and that's really hard. And it's amazing how even when you're doing work, even when you're aware of those things, even when you spend so much time, that stuff can get triggered in so many tiny, tiny, tiny ways. And I think you spoke earlier about something, you kind of hinted at something about when a man isn't acts in a way that isn't within full integrity, or his boundaries are soft. And I think that's something that I've experienced and a lot of women I hear experiencing around, say, for example, Instagram and social media things, that there's not it can be really detrimental in relationships currently, because the tools and the language and the rules are quite loose. And then it can cause these very leaky boundaries, because it's almost like it's a new porn in a way. There's this porn, but with access to the actual people and to the man or the partner who's engaged in it. It's not always a man. It can seem like, well, I'm just chatting to this person here. I'm just looking at their content of them in a thong doing some yoga. That's cool. Like, I love yoga, whatever that is. And it just happens to be 11 o'clock at night, and that's fine. And then the woman goes, well, actually, it doesn't feel very fine to me. It feels really unsafe. And they're like, what the hell? I'm just talking to some woman on Instagram. What do you do? And so then that again makes the woman go, okay, shit, I'm being that controlling. I'm being the controlling, naggy, vulnerable. So how do we navigate that? And how do we learn the language of noticing when are you talking from a place of insecurity and vulnerability and fear versus a place of like, well, actually, this doesn't sit nicely with me, and this feels like a boundary is being crossed.
So I've very much had this experience. For quite a few years, I was single and living a very beautiful life, traveling the world, teaching, loving my life. And I formed certain habits that when I was single, they were fine. And then I met my partner. And she's in this work, and her oracle is absolutely fucking sharp. And the oracle is one of the most underused tools the feminine has, because she was told she's too much and to turn it down and to don't listen to it and it's wrong and all of these things. So she doesn't trust it. She hasn't had the practice enough to really hone it in. But it's her connection to source, and it's incredibly powerful. And a man will yearn for her oracle, whereas a boy will run from it. And in the beginning of our relationship, she noticed that I'd liked somebody's photos. And she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, unacceptable. It's like, yeah, but it's a friend from it. And she looked at me and she's like, no, unacceptable. That's your leaky bullshit from before, and that's not going to fly. And a part of me was like, oh, well, fuck you. And then a part of me was like, damn it. She got me. And the shadow part of me didn't want to believe it. The shadow, oh yeah, but it's just a woman that's just there, and it's just. And she's right. And she really honed in on what is the part of you that seeks validation. What is the part of you that is just yearning for somebody to say, oh yeah, I like you, yeah, or this. I think you can absolutely set boundaries in a relationship. And as a woman, if you feel something that you know to be true, it's a pretty good chance it's true. Regardless of what the guy says, there's a pretty good chance that actually he's gaslighting you. And the problem comes when you start to overthink and second guess, and then suddenly the truth is actually distorted somewhat by pattern and by past behavior, and it's not actually the truth of the moment. And, well, I can't trust you because 3 years ago you did this thing. It's like, so heart connected, womb connected, stillness, like what is the truth of this moment? How am I feeling? And what is going to serve love? And what is a way that this message is going to land that is going to serve love?
And so, I mean, I know we probably don't have too much more time with you. I really appreciate all the time and all the insight. But this sort of feeds into another area we actually hadn't even got it charted to talk about. But in terms of like monogamy versus polygamy and the sort of like multiple sexual partner thing, like, you know, because a lot of that I think probably gets brought into, like, if you look at like Sex at Dawn and those sorts of books where they talk about, well, okay, maybe it's non-natural for expectations of a man to kind of just want a single partner, or and that then that becomes maybe an excuse for himself, ourselves, in terms of how our sexual energy behaves. Like, what's your instinct around that? I know there's no absolute truths here, but what is your instinct around that?
This is a question I get asked a lot. And I've had to put a little bit of a damper on my full fire perspective. But as you said, there's no right answer. It is totally up to each individual. And I know a lot of people in monogamous relationships that are very unhealthy. And I know many, many people in monogamous relationships where it's incredibly healthy. I know one person in an open relationship or one couple where it's healthy, and the rest is just an absolute shit show disaster. This whole world, and it comes back to that original question of the dating apps. It's like at any possible moment, you might meet somebody who's just a bit better. And maybe they're exactly that way, but they got blue eyes instead of brown. And maybe they're exactly that way, and there's always going to be somebody better. And this, especially with men, this Peter Pan mentality of, I don't want to be tied down. I want to be free. There is far more freedom in commitment than in infinite choice. And unfortunately, men don't get that because we have so many opportunities. And there's a deep feel of abandonment. There's a deep fear of abandonment. There's a deep fear of intimacy. If she leaves me, that's okay because I got another two on the side. It is. I know people that are deep in these communities in Europe, and they just continually perpetuate trauma throughout the community, even though they're the leaders of the community, even though they teach on it. And it's just a blind spot. It's a shadowy blind spot that panders to their insecurity and their wounding.
Cool. Good insight.
Oh, Nick, there's so many more questions. We might have to do a part 2 at some point in the future.
I have more time if you want to go.
Okay, I have a question that we might do as a separate, random thing. And I'd just like to proceed this by saying you don't have to, if this isn't something you're comfortable to talk into, you don't have to. But something that I found really tricky, like my son's 10 now. When he was really little, no one was talking openly and honestly about postpartum sex, the way that it changes the dynamics in a relationship, how you could have prepared for that better. I mean, I was in an amazing marriage with a guy that I thought we had talked through all the ways that might go, very open, had studied all those things, all the ways that one imagined. And still, it was a shit show. I mean, it was a shit show because we had this babe that woke every 45 minutes for 3 years, every night, all night. We had the breastfeeding issues. He works nights. I had to look at the baby in the daytime and then the nighttime. Then he got ill for 3 years. Like it was a maelstrom of situations. And through it all, there was no one that you could go, so what is normal here? And how can we find a way back to that intimacy? And what can that even look like? And how do they hold space for me as a woman who my body is now changed? I've got this totally different pelvis. I feel differently about myself. I've stepped into this different archetype and I need someone to go like, hey, you're still really beautiful and this is still attractive. And maybe it looks different now, but this is how this works. There was like nothing and no one would be honest. And we've asked so many people to come on the podcast in real time when they're in postpartum and talk about like, are they having sex? What does that look like? Was it the way they hoped? People who've talked about postpartum. So there's so many people educating about postpartum sex who've never been in the postpartum period. And then once they're in the postpartum period, they won't talk about how it is. So I wonder, is that something you're comfortable talking about your experience pre, post, during?
Yeah, it's just, this is a hot topic at the moment because I was one of those people speaking about postpartum sex that had not had a baby. I was speaking at it from a polarity perspective. So when a mother, so I'll speak about it from my perspective and then there are like 4 ways that you can really keep the romance flying in postpartum. So Sarah gave birth naturally, so there was some healing to do. There was a rupture, there was stitches. But we made love, I think, 1 month after he was born. And there are 4 reasons I think it fails. And I would say for us, we're not totally, it's not 100% where I want it to be, or where we want it to be, but there are certain tweaks that we're adjusting along the way. The first one is the man needs to hold his seed. He needs to retain, because every time he loses his seed, he also loses testosterone, and already his testosterone is lower once she gives birth. I think once she gets pregnant. So there's less of a desire to ravish her. There's less of a desire to lead. There's less energy. There's the bone density is less. The muscle mass is less. Like he becomes less of what makes him attractive. Retaining his seed actually cultivates this energy that has him at an edge where, although he might not get to or need to, where he could ravish her at any point. The second, and you spoke to this really beautifully, is her body has changed. She doesn't sleep. She's exhausted. I drown Sarah in affirmation of how beautiful she is, how much I love her, how much I desire her, how much I want her, how, like, all the time, everything, just how sexy she is, how an amazing mother she is. I just really make sure to blast her with that, because I know how difficult it is for her. So it's something that I was very aware of. The third piece is polarity. So when a woman becomes a mother, she actually becomes far more masculine in her energy. What I mean by that is she's now taking care of the baby. She's looking after, providing, protecting, creating structure. She becomes like full warrior mother, yes. Energetically, that occurs as more masculine. Any child or every child is feminine in its energy. So you have this little ball of chaos, which is the feminine, and then you have the mother or the father, which is the masculine structure that contains it. So if she naturally becomes more masculine in her energy and the father's just cruising along doing everything that he did without much different, the polarity suddenly diminishes. So the polarity of the relationship's gone. There's no desire. And there's, oh, well, we're tired. It's like, yeah, sure, you're tired, but it doesn't mean that there can't be desire. So one of the things that I make sure of is that our polarity is amped up all the way, all the time. Because that means I walk into the kitchen or I walk into another room and she's there and every part of me just wants to absolutely fucking devour her. And she feels it, but I don't do it. And this is another part of really allowing that polarity to build, that charge to build. But the fourth piece, and this is something that I've caught myself out on, men find connection far more deeply through the physical, whereas women find connection far more deeply through the heart. When we're tired, when we're exhausted, when we're lazy, men resort to the physical. Like, just touch me. Like, I want to touch you. I want to grab you. I want to fuck you. I want to do these things to you. And she's exhausted. She's absolutely out of wit's end. She doesn't want to be touched. She's just put the baby down. She doesn't want you to touch her. She wants you to connect with her. So she wants you to amplify that heart intimacy, that emotional intimacy. And that is the only way that her body will ever open, is by opening up the heart. So there are these 4 pieces that I find to be really critical in postpartum, really critical in relationship, but especially in postpartum. The final little piece is people say sleep when they're sleeping. Our boy sounds like a fucking retarded pug when he sleeps. So I'm sorry. How do you sleep with that? So actually, when he's sleeping, that's our time to connect and be intimate.
Yeah. Yes, it was always amazing for me. Like my son was the exact same. So loud. No one had told me that he could be loud.
Sleeper.
That's so loud. I had to get earplugs, and even with in-person, I was asleep. Like our bed was like, and we had a co-sleeper, but he was useless at staying in it. So I put him at the far diagonal corner of the bed, and I would sleep with my head at the far diagonal corner of the bed with the earplugs in, and then he had to lie to the midwife because they didn't want you to have the earplugs in, because otherwise you might sleep as if you were going to sleep through them waking up. But anyway, they were telling you could sleep through them waking up. And you'd still be like, how could this tiny thing be making so much noise? Like so much. You're fine that 45-minute window and you're getting to sleep like 5 minutes ago and then they're awake again. You're
It's like a truffle hunting pig in the corner of your bed.
this is amazing. Solid, no?
It's a floppy larynx.
Oh yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Who knew?
And mine had the really strong Moro reflex, so he was always hitting himself in the face. So then I had to straddle him like super tight.
Yeah, well, the same thing. You're just punching yourself in the face and waking. I'm like, bro, what are you doing?
Like, what are you doing here? And that's a safety mechanism as well. And it's also proprioception. So sometimes when they come down, so my son, this is not, maybe, I don't know, anyway, just talking now, but my son had a massive, massive head, like off the scale when they measured it. It wasn't even on the night, it wasn't 97%. I was like off that percentile, and my pelvis is quite narrow. So the actual pushing part, which I was all like, oh, I'll just get to the pushing part. And that's the bit they're like, and then you get to the pushing at the end. You're like, yes. And they're like, you're pushing now. It's so good. Like 5 hours later, this baby's still, and they keep going, we can see the head. And it's like, when he finally came out, they were like, oh, we could see like 1% at the top of the head. And they were telling me he was crowning. So because he had this extreme pressure on his head as he was coming down through the birth canal, and because he was engaged really early, like 34 weeks, his head was always on the base of my pelvis. He was used to deep feeling in the womb. And so those babies, sometimes when they've had that really intense, they come out and they're like, whoa, there's so much space. And so they need that deep pressure work for a good while, like afterwards, in order to let their nervous system go like, oh, okay, I'm safe. Because that's been their, like we've been talking about, it's the same thing. That's been their container. And it was so helpful when that got explained to me, because then I had to do things that when he was older, it might show up in different ways. Like he'd be in playgroup and he'd go up, say hi to another kid, and he'd just go, hey, boof. And it would just be like, his hi was too hard. Like it was, he didn't know. He was just like, hey, and they'd be flying. The mom would be like,
what did you screw?
So then I'd have to do practice really hard high fives and then medium high fives and low high fives, or pressing against the wall or wrapping him in a yoga blanket just for a few minutes a day. And then he wouldn't seek that like really strong sensory input. It was so interesting.
Yeah. There was we are definitely really just talking now, but did you send me or did I send you the one of the chicken being swaddled?
Yeah.
That amazing. What's her name again?
It was that midwife. I can't. Jen
Hamilton. Have you come across her feed?
What's her name?
Jen Hamilton.
She's an Australian midwife, but she also...
Yeah, she's a bit older.
No, she's 30s, I think. She looks 30s. I don't know, but she's got these baby weird chickens that she's got odd habits, but she has a pet chicken thing, and she did a reel the night of her swaddling the chicken and showing the chicken going down into it, and the chicken starts to purr. It's like, it's up like this, and it's like this weird shaggy headed thing, like not like a normal chicken. And then she kind of wraps the towel around. She's technique so that he'll be able to lie his head under here.
It's a special needs chicken.
It's a very special needs.
Like anyone eats actually. I'm not being me, like special needs chicken, like, but
at a glance, you know it. And then so the chicken's like this, and she wraps it, and as soon as she does it, the head just sort of goes.
So funny. So it's actually, you can see how
you
see that, don't they, when you get a puppy.
What's her name?
Jen Hamilton. She's a...
Can you see that?
She beat. Why not? That's pretty is fun.
Ah, okay, because I got the... I'm sorry. Jolie N. Hamilton.
Yeah. She's only...
She's out to yeah, when you said Australia, I was like, yeah, this. We'll send you a link afterwards anyway, so I'm sending like, well, it's very random, but well worth the watch. Sorry.
It's about just...
destroyed the end of our podcast.
I think she's really good about... She talks about birth and birth trauma, or like experiences of, say people who've had babies dying. She talks about it in a way that's really honest and really real, that I think is really helpful for when you're encountering, like I work a lot with mums, and some moms have lost babies or they've miscarried or, they've had birth trauma. And she talks into that from a midwife perspective in a way that's really refreshing and really
it's amazing. She really good. She really gets.
No, she does. She eats chickens. Yeah. It's like one or the other.
Yeah, please send it to you.
Yeah, and okay, so thank you. So lovely read at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing so openly with us and giving your time, because I know time is precious when you have a little teeny baby. It's a no joke thing. So thank you. And when we're ready to post it, we'll let you know when it's going live. We'll do a bunch of little Instagram clips, shorter clips that we'll put out, and shorter YouTube clips, and we'll tag you with them. Is there anything that you have upcoming that would be useful to coincide with this, that you're going to do, that you'd like to help promote it, or workshops or websites or something?
Yeah, we have a 4 months men's program. It's a kind of an initiatory thing that comes out middle of January, so there'll be time for that. We start releasing that this week.
Okay, great. Will you either on our Instagram thing where we were chatting or on the email send us whatever you want, and then we'll include it and talk about that as well?
Perfect.
Fab.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And lovely to meet you. And best of luck with the new baby. And enjoy it. Like, sounds you've the formula worked. I know, with all the messiness, but you've the formula well worked. So it's great to hear that intention. It's a great role model for me personally. So thank you. Yeah.
I think it's so important for, I teach birth workshops for women, for couples, just individual couples. And so much of what I do in that is just talking about the relationship and then trying to get them to observe their relationship dynamic and understand how that might change or how that might show up in the different scenarios that might come up, and have those conversations before the birth, so that they're not trying to have those conversations in the messy, tired, like all that stuff period. And I think, having that, those conversations are things I wish it's been so good to have that conversation in that way, have those 4 points and talk about them with my husband and go like, oh, this is how that could be, I think it would have changed so many things, and I think for so many people. So it's great that someone's doing that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, guys.
Nice one.
Wonderful day.
Take care.
You too. Ciao.
Thank you.